Another powerful new animation feature in Maya 2013 is anim, also known as Animation Transfer Object Model, which basically allows you to transfer animation to and from characters, either the same character or different versions of the same character or even different characters altogether. So what you'll see here is I have an animation of my character walking by and making a turn. I've got a couple of things going on here in addition to the base animation. I have a constraint here that's driving the head so that he'll actually look at that constraint as he walks by. Now, I also have an animation layer that's doing a correction on the arms so that the arms won't actually penetrate through the legs as he's walking. So, including not only the animation as well as those additional things, I can save those all out into the anim format. So, we have a couple of additional things as well that I want to talk about. First of all, let's bring up my anim menu set here, and we'll just kind of leave that up here. First thing I want to do is create what's called a template. Now this isn't necessary, but it's actually quite useful for kind of predefining the different parts of animation that you may or may not want to retrieve. So I'm going to take all of the nodes that are associated with this character, and I'm going to put those into a template. And we'll just call this template my template, and I'll just overwrite the one that's there. Now what I want to do is basically go in and just save all these nodes out into that template. So that will save out an XML format, basically listing all the nodes that are going to contain animation. Now the next thing I want to do is create views within that template. So I'm going to create one view for the upper body. So now I'll go in and I'll just select all of the nodes that are associated with the upper body, everything except for the hips there. And I'll also select this locator here, which is the head constraint. And I'll apply those to the template. So all it's going to do is it's going to push additional information into the template. Now I'm going to take the base controller, the hips, as well as the feet controls, and I'm going to put those into a separate view. So we'll call this lower body. So now I've created two views within a single template, upper and lower body. So the next thing I want to do is actually export my animation. So I'll go into my export animation options here, and I'm just going to take everything and I'm going to export animation as well as static values, which I'll talk about here in a second. I'm going to turn off baked animation because I don't want to actually do any baking, and I want to include set-driven keys and constraints. So what this will do is it will save all of that into a single animation file. So I'm just going to call this my walk anim. We'll save that out, and I want to save everything that's selected. Everything else should be fine. We'll save out that animation, and now we want to reapply it to a different character. So here you can see I have a very different character, but with a similar rig. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. So I have controls that are already set up, but I have no animation. If I push play, there's nothing there. I also have a constraint target object for the look at, which is actually different than my other scene, but it has no connection to the head. I also have no animation layers. So what I want to do here is I want to import animation onto my character, first of all using the template that I just created. So I'll set this to template, my new template, or rather my template. I'm going to replace all the existing animation with their time range from the file, and I'm going to use the upper body template, or rather the upper body view. So now I'll go in and I'll load the my walk animation. I can just select a single object that is connected to this view, and I'll simply apply. So what that's going to do is it's going to apply all the upper body animation to my character. So as you can see, it's created the upper body animation. It's also not only animated the constraint, but it's created the relationship between the constraint and the target object. And then additionally, if I go over to my animation layers, what you can see here is it's also included the offset animation layers for the hands. So again, it's able to preserve all of that from a single XML-based animation file. So let's go in and import the rest of the animation on the lower body. And this time I'll just grab a foot controller. I'll switch my view to be lower body, and now I'll simply import that onto the feet. What you'll notice here is that it did indeed find the other foot, and it did indeed apply the lower body animation. But it didn't actually apply the rest of the lower body animation correctly. So there are a number of things that we can do to resolve this. For starters, we can go in and we can look at the original animation file and figure out what the problem is. So here you can see I have a node called spaceman hips anim. If I actually take a look at the file, my walk anim, what I can see is if I search for hips, I'll actually find that the hips attribute, or the hips node rather, in the anim file is actually named differently. So here it's named dummy instead of spaceman. So I have a couple of nodes that are named dummy as opposed to spaceman. This was done on the export side. So I can actually go in, because this is an XML file, I can actually either manually or through some sort of an external script, say a Python script, I can do a search and replace on this file, make a copy of it, and then import the newly created modified file and have that affect my character appropriately. The other alternative to this is on import, I can actually specify some simple search and replace and prefix or suffix options. So now if I were to go in and grab the hips as well as the base controller here, I'll just set this into selected mode, and rather than manually editing the XML file that contains the animation, I'll just do a simple search and replace, looking for the word dummy and replacing that with the word spaceman. Now I'll simply apply that, and bam, now I have the new animation on the upper body, the lower body, as well as the search and replace that has been applied on the hips and the master control. So now I have all of my animation intact, including my constraint, again including my animation layers, as well as the additional nodes that may have been slightly different from the original file. Anim can also be used for other purposes. For instance, static values would allow you to save simple poses on characters and or other types of objects. So it could also be a way of externalizing the transformation values of certain types of objects. So for instance, when I export a static value or a pose, I can then re-import that onto another character or a different version of that character. So if I just go in and reset my values here, what I'll do is I'll just quickly go in here and I'll just select all the curves in my scene, and that would basically allow me to select all the control objects. And then I've got a couple of other objects to select. I'll select the arms as well. I'll simply go into selected mode, I'll replace based on a string, and then I'll just choose, instead of an animation file, a pose file. This is also in an anim format. So I've got a file here called weapon draw. I'll just simply load that and replace. And now I've put my character into a weapon draw. So now I can create as many variations of this pose as I need to, externalize them, and apply them to other characters in different scenes.